Bueno, buenos días a todos. En nombre del Gobierno argentino y especialmente del Ministerio de Trabajo, Empleo y Seguridad Social de la Nación, quiero darles la bienvenida a esta segunda jornada de la cuarta conferencia sobre erradicación sostenida del trabajo infantil y darles la bienvenida también a este panel sobre empleo rural. Nuestra moderadora va a ser la señorita Nomia.
Gracias. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for attending this panel, which is called Rural Economy, Meeting the New Sustainable Development Goals Estimates. And I'd like to start off by introducing my panelists, starting from right down at the bottom to the left of me. Carla Caballeros, the Executive Director of the Guatemalan Chamber of Agriculture. I've got Andrew Tego, the Deputy Secretary General of the General Agricultural Workers Union in Ghana. Junko Sasaki, the Director of Social Policies and Rural Institutions Division at the FAO. Norma Flores Lopez, Chair of the Coalition for the U.S. Child Labor's Domestic Affairs Committee. Jan Vis, the Senior Manager for Social and Environmental Impact at Nestle. Raja Ashfaq Sawar, Minister for Labour and Human Resources, Punjab, Pakistan. And the Honourable Ignatius Bafour Awua, Minister for Employment and Labour Relations from Ghana. So I'd just like to start off by giving a brief introduction to this issue. We know that the rural economy holds significant potential for creating decent and productive jobs and prosperity, but more than 70% of all child labour occurs in agriculture and its various subsectors, and much of that is hazardous. At least 11%, looking at statistics, of all forced labour happens in commercial agriculture and fishing. So the development of policies and programmes to combat child labour and forced labour in agriculture and the rural economy is seen as a priority, and it's seen as needed to also promote the sustainability of the rural economy and the livelihoods that depend on it. And our panellists will discuss over the next 2 hours more at length their experiences, their expertise and their ideas. I have a series of questions to put to them, but I would encourage the audience to please use the conference app to ask any questions, and especially if they're specifically for any member of the panel. If the app isn't working for you, just write them on a piece of paper, and there is a representative from the ILO here who's just standing up and raising her hand. Do come to her and bring her your piece of paper. So let's get started. I want to begin my first question to Honourable Ignatius Bafour Awua, the Minister for Employment and Labour Relations of Ghana. The question to you, Bafour, is what are the main drivers of child labour and forced labour in the rural economy?
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon to you all. Before maybe I answer your question, let me take this opportunity to thank the organizers, ILO and the Argentine government, for inviting Ghana to participate in this all-important seminar on the eradication of child labor from the surface of the earth, let me put it that way. Ghana, as perhaps you may be aware, is an African country that is mainly agrarian. Our main business is agriculture. About 50 to 60% of the employable population are engaged in agriculture. So naturally, anybody given birth to in Ghana grows up having some instinct in agriculture. But unfortunately, even though we have quite a number of our population being engaged in agriculture, in terms of creation of wealth, there's no correspondent link to the wealth creation of the country. If you look at our GDP, you have about 55% of the GDP coming from the service and industry sector. In fact, between service and industry, you have well over 80% of our GDP coming from there, and agriculture now contributes only 18.7% of our GDP. But that is the sector which also employs the majority of the people. So it means that you have more people engaged in one economic activity, yet the wealth from that economic activity is so low. So it explains why you have so much poverty within the agricultural value chain. And indeed, the poverty within the rural economy is so endemic that between the aged and the child, you can really see poverty. So if you ask me the number one drivers of child labor within the agricultural economy, I will tell you that the number one problem is poverty. And I've explained to you why it is coming from poverty. But besides poverty, there are issues within the agricultural value chain. That sector has a lot of informality. In fact, we don't even have accurate data on agricultural practices within the country. And then, besides that, we also, the sector lacks so many other things. People who want to engage in farming will want to have access to land, will want to have access to credit, will want to have access to extension services to be able to improve upon their practices. But I must admit that some of these things are lacking, even though government is doing so much to improve upon it. But government's efforts as compared to the demands from the people cannot, there's no way you can match the two. So there's a disparity in there. And I want to believe that those are some of the issues which contribute to child labor. But the bottom line is that poverty is so endemic within the agri-economy, and there are so many factors which actually contribute to that. Indeed, when you come to Ghana, the agricultural sector is dominated by especially the production of cocoa. So anytime cocoa production, especially value in cocoa price at the international level goes down, it naturally translates into farmers also earning lower income, even though government is trying as much as possible to absorb the shocks, especially when it comes to the reduction in cocoa prices outside. For instance, in this year, the cocoa year for 2017-2018 production year, government has decided that irrespective of the fact that cocoa price internationally has gone down by over 40%, government is still going to give farmers the producer price it's paid them the previous year. Hitherto, the option would have been that, okay, let us transfer this back to the farmer. And indeed, if we do that, it will even worsen the plight of these farmers. So, Madam Moderator, coming back to your question, I will say that the underlying pain of poverty within the rural economy, the underlying pain of child labor, and the main cause of child labor within the rural economy is that of poverty. I had also indicated that there are so much informality within the rural economy. They don't have access to credit, they don't have access to too much extension officers, because if you look at the proportion of extension officer to farmers, the disparity is so huge. You have about one extension officer attending to well over 1,000 farmers producing. So you can imagine the number of times one extension officer will have access to all the farmers that he or she is detailed to be able to have. I think I want to rest here, but I must also admit that government has identified these problems, and almost every activity of government is geared towards addressing this issue of poverty. And of course, by extension also, government action is aimed at eradicating child labor. And government is doing that through integrated programs, because we have identified industry as a major partner. We also have identified civil society as a major partner. And then we also have identified even our local communities, local actors who are very vocal, also as social partners in the fight against child labor, especially within the agri-value chain. And if you permit me, I will want to cite an example of a program we have with, especially within the cocoa industry. As I indicated, Ghana has about 6 out of 10 regions that produces cocoa. So even if we're able to handle the issue of child labor within the cocoa industry alone, by extension, we will be reducing child labor by about 50% within that catchment area. And there has been a partnership between industry, government, and civil society that has worked so well. And there is this model which is being practiced between Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire in conjunction with US Doll, with the cocoa industry also participating. They are using especially NGOs as actors within the field. And I must admit that through that we have been able to create awareness within the cocoa industry. So if you go to any cocoa farmer in Ghana, if you are, and then you interview them, they will be able to tell you that this activity of this child is child labor. This other activity is not child labor. So at least that alone helps us to be able to come out with programs that will address them. Government has come out with so many interventions, especially in the area of education. We have identified that the best way to be able to stop child labor within the agri-economy or the agri sector within our country is to be able to turn more people to school. And as I speak now, we have been able to improve school attendance to about 95%. So 95% of all school children going age in Ghana are now in school. And that one, it is irrespective of whether the person is in an urban area or within an agri area. And in some cases, even the percentage is above 95%. But the average figure is 95%. But added to that, we are not just interested in allowing more people to go to school, we are also interested in retaining people in school. Because it is one thing going to school today and it is another thing not going. So what we have done is to introduce incentives to keep people in school. A typical example is what we call capitation grant. Hitherto parents will have to pay school fees for their children. Now government absorbs 100% school fees from KG up to age 16. The Constitution of Ghana says that every child should have access to free basic education. But what the Constitution failed to do is to define what it means by free basic education. But government has indicated that its understanding of free basic education means that the person should have access to free education up to pre-university level. So in Ghana, from age 1 up to pre-university education is totally free. And because of that, we have more and more people going to school. And then we have specifically also targeted rural areas where people sometimes even find it difficult providing 1 square meal a day for their walks, and have brought what we call a school feeding project, where every child that goes to school is accorded 1 square meal, a balanced diet for the time within which that person will be in school. So now, instead of school children perhaps thinking of completing or closing from school at 2 o'clock and running to their parents in the farms before they can go and eat, now they can eat in school. So when they even close, there's no need for them to follow their parents to farm. So this, in actual fact, has kept so many children out of the farms and then in a way stopping them from child labor. As I indicated, government has extended free education from basic school, from primary school up to the secondary school. But then we also realize that it is not everybody that has the desire to be able to continue education even up to the secondary level. Perhaps after primary education, you will have some of them falling out of the system. What is it that we're going to do for them? We have introduced a series of TVET training programs for people who may not necessarily will want to have secondary education. So we have our vocational training institutions, our skill training institutions offering stopgap work-ready jobs for people who may also fall out. So these are some of the things that we are doing to make sure that at least within the agricultural or rural economy to actually mitigate the effects of child labor. Thank you.
Thank you, Bafur. So I'd like to, and we'll return for another question, but just to move along the line, I'd like to now turn to Raja Ashfaq Sawar, the Minister of Labour and Human Resources for the Punjab. And Raja, the state of Punjab has made tackling child labour a priority. Can you tell us a little bit more about the challenges that you have faced in the rural areas of the state and how you're meeting those challenges?
First of all, I would like to thank the government of Argentina, the Labor Ministry, and the government of Argentina, along with ILO, for organizing such a mega event for the child labor. And I would also like to welcome the panelists and all the stakeholders, the employers and the leaders, workers, everyone. Child labor, I would like to go back in 2014, and it has never happened in the region that we held a South Asia Labor Conference, and I hosted it in Lahore. And almost from all the South Asian countries, 7 countries, we had participation of labor leaders and the ministers, the government, and everyone. And since then, with the help of ILO and ILOs, we had 7 teams, and the technical experts came from India, ILOs, and they all headed the teams, and from that time onwards we have actually moved forward, and we made sure of 2-3 things, that there was a law. Before I would go into the law, I would like to stress upon or bring it to your knowledge that a couple of incidents which happened and which really touched me, and I'm sure you will also appreciate. In Punjab, education is Pakistan is our priority, and education for the children, and especially for the children who cannot afford to have good education, is our priority. So what happened is, we have these boards under which the government supervises the education, and then the position holders are given the due respect which they should, to encourage them for the future and give them this encouragement that they should be successful in life, to be somewhere. And to our surprise, and to your surprise, 90% of those children are from the labor class, or the people who cannot afford to be, because of the lust or because of what they see around them, and they work hard to hold those positions. And then the government in return, what it does is gives them all that respect which is to be given, like make them the state guests, bring them to the state guest houses and encourage them and give them the credit for what of their achievements. So there was this young boy. When he walked in, there is a district in Punjab which is called Sahiwal. And in Sahiwal, that boy topped the board, and he was one of the invitees who were invited by the government. So when he walked in, because of poverty, the clothes he was wearing and the shoes did not even match. But he came first in the board, and I somehow or the other kept track of the boy and see how he transforms himself. So we gave him a guard of honor. They went on a study tour to Europe, Germany. And when they came back, and I went to the airport to receive those children who were the position holders and went on a 4-week study tour. And after that, they get the scholarships to go to the colleges and post-graduation. When they came back, I didn't see the guy, that young man coming back. So I especially went to the person who was an organizer and asked him, where did that boy go? He says, he's here. The guy had transformed so much that I did not even recognize him when he went past by me. So today you will be happy to know that that boy is in a medical college and he's in a final year of his medical college, and pretty soon he'll be a doctor. So this is not the only example. We have about laborers, just the children of the laborers. We have about 5,000 postgraduates who are going into medical colleges. We have a PhDs and who have been given scholarships overseas in the United States. We have 1,000 in our top IT college. So our main concentration and to eradicate child labor, we can come up with all the policies in the world, arm twisting, which we sometimes have to do, unless and until we make education common and make sure they all go to schools. It is not possible. And along with that, I have, since the day before yesterday and many conferences I go to, and you will all bear me out, I have not heard anywhere about malnutrition. These children who go to school in the poor, poverty, and I am working with Nestle in Pakistan on these malnutrition children, and I have a program in these labor schools. We are working on this healthy child program. But in these programs, I personally feel that the ILO and the labor departments or governments should actually, along with all the policies being made, malnutrition should also be a part of it, because unless and until you have a healthy child, just sending a school which are undernourished and not properly fed child, breastfeeding is not common. And the worst part is in Pakistan, it has become stylish. You know, in rural areas, they breastfeed the children because they can't afford. And in the urban areas where they can afford to have children, they can afford to feed the children, and without breastfeeding them, they do it. So it's somehow or other, it is lacking in the educated class also, not just in the rural areas. We have made quite a few amendments, especially you must have heard, and we have received a lot of appreciation regarding the brick kilns in Punjab. There was forced slavery. But the Chief Minister of Punjab, Shahbaz Sharif, he held it, for a political government in a third world country. I'm sure you understand how difficult it is because it's politicking and compromising happens, but he dealt it with the iron fist. He dealt it with the iron fist, and he has eradicated every child, and it was almost, we have put 83,000 children from the brick kilns, and they are now going to schools, 83,000. So, it is a big number which has, and we have made all the necessary, the children which we send to school, because even if they are just helping, whether it's agriculture, whether it's brick kiln, even if they are just helping out and not getting paid for it, still the children which are being sent to school, we give a stipend to their parents just to make sure that they do not take the children, and there is a whole system according to which we ensure it happens. We did not restrict our efforts to the brick kiln only. The drive has been extended to other sectors also. Under annual development program, 3 projects to eliminate child bonded labor with the overall cost of 500 million are in completion stage in 10 districts. A mega project titled as Elimination of Child and Bonded Labor Project, integrated project for promotion and decent work for vulnerable workers in Punjab province, covering 36 districts of Punjab, at a total cost of 5 billion rupees is under implementation, wherein 344,000 children laborers will be rehabilitated through non-formal basic education, skill development and other interventions. 80,000 parents of child labor will be facilitated for acquiring national identity cards. This is something which I would like to bring, because children and the parents living in the rural areas, at the time of birth, because they were not educated enough, they were not informed, that they have to register the child which has been born. So we had to take a special initiative to make sure all those children and the parents who are not registered are registered, and they are being, and over 80,000 has been registered. We appreciate the assistance of ILO in developing and launching this project. ILO has been very much involved, and we appreciate that, which is unprecedented in the scope and budgetary allocation of the region. Believing in the significance of statistics and planning, policy making, first ever provincial survey of child labor has been initiated in Punjab with the technical guidance and support of ILO and UNICEF. Ladies and gentlemen, let me assure you that we are committed to contribute to the target 8.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals, and we appreciate support of stakeholders and the ILO to achieve it. In the end, I thank these organizers once again for giving me the opportunity of sharing experiences and for hosting this mega event, the ILO and the government collectively. I thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me turn now to Jan Vis, the Senior Manager for Social and Environmental Impact at Nestlé. And Jan, in many rural communities, we see that even when labour shortages are pushing up wages, you have young people particularly who leave, they want to work in urban areas. What do you think can therefore be done to make sure that there is still a future generation of farmers and fishers who can produce food?
Thank you, Nomia, and thank you to the organizers for inviting Nestlé. I must say it was quite refreshing to hear from the honorable ministers from Ghana and Pakistan about their efforts on the ground. Yesterday and this morning, the discussions really revolved around regulation and standards and the role of labor inspections. And I think this is really like an important piece for the success. For our success, collective success, to address the issue of child labor and forced labor. But I guess I've been invited to this panel to also shed a light on what could be the contribution of the private sector. How can we actually unleash the potentials of global supply chains, and what is the role that we can play as part of this equation? So let me, I would argue that, like in the last decade, there were like basically two main trends that clarified, how as businesses we can contribute to this challenge. The first one were the UN guiding principles, because they basically clarify, what should be the roles of governments and private sector when it comes to protecting and respecting human rights. And I will say a few words about that. And the second one is the Sustainable Development Goals. I think it's the first time that, as part of Millennium Global Goals, UN Global Goals, the private sector has actually participated in setting them and has been invited to contribute to their implementation. And I think this is a huge opportunity that we should all understand and tap into to achieve these challenges. So first of all, the UN guiding principles, this responsibility to respect human rights is very important, because the UN guiding principles encourage companies to take responsibility for what's going on in their supply chain, and this is quite new actually. It's the first time that like companies have actually to look at what's going on in their supply chain, so they have to not only be aware of the issues and challenges and impacts, but they also need to take action. And what is interesting here is that, based on our experience carrying out human rights due diligence, especially in high-risk countries, we see that, by doing so and doing it well, I would argue, you already contribute a great deal to the SDGs. Because a lot of the remediation that you need to action as a company to remediate issues like child labor or forced labor actually goes in the direction that, we heard before in terms of like access to education, access to vocational training, or even like malnutrition in schools. This is, what we're talking about, when we talk about remediating child labor and forced labor in global supply chains. I would like to take one example here, which is actually the example of child labor in cocoa sector, mainly related to Côte d'Ivoire, because we have more experience there than in Ghana. A month ago, we released this report that I would encourage you to have a look at, together with our partner, the International Cocoa Initiative, basically summarizing our efforts in this area for the last 6 years. Back in 2012, we set up what we call the Child Labor Monitoring and Remediation System in Côte d'Ivoire. And the innovation here is that we basically we leverage our supply chain to build the capacities where they are needed for us, to help us actually monitor the situation and also like come up with effective remediation. So this is not something that is, like in parallel to, like how we operate as a business, but just the opposite. It's something that is actually like integrated into the way that, we do business in Côte d'Ivoire. So we build capacities at different levels. So just to give you a couple of examples, we rely heavily on local communities, where we have community liaison people that interact with the farmers to ask them about their social, economic conditions for us to help us, where the risks are when they relate to child labor. At the farmer cooperative level, we also have actually people, child labor agents, that are responsible to collect all the data that is gathered by these community Asian people. And then at the trader level, which are basically the ones that, we actually buy cocoa from, we also build capacities of their agronomists, which are actually our eyes and ears on the ground to actually spot, identify issues or risks related to child labor. At our own level at Nestlé, we also build capacities where this is necessary to coordinate our efforts around this system. The results are great in terms of monitoring. We now cover a bit more than 70 farmers cooperatives in Ivory Coast. That represents around 50,000 farmers. 41 children are being monitored in this system, and it has helped us identify 7,000 child laborers. So we are in a position now to say that as Nestlé, in our cocoa supply chain in Côte d'Ivoire, we have 7,000 child laborers that work in this area. And this is great because before we didn't know. And I would argue that not a lot of companies out there actually know what's going on in their own supply chain. And this is the first step. That's the first step of the human rights due diligence, where you need to identify where the issues are. But of course, this is not the end of the story. Once you know, you need to act upon the issue. So in terms of remediation activities, we have been able so far to help 5,000 children, either through distribution of birth certificates, school kits, but also through the building of schools. So building schools is no longer part of our CSR or philanthropy approach, but this is really part of our remediation approach. What we can actually do as a business, together with the governments of Ghana, Ivory Coast, and others, to actually help children reintegrate the educational system. We've also done other things. We are testing other remediation activities, actions, like setting up income-generating activities or setting up community service groups that are composed mainly of young people. What is important is that this system is not run by me or by the sustainability department at Nestlé. We don't have one actually, but this is really run by the business. So this is really the confectionery strategic business unit that is responsible to run it and make progress against our targets on child labor. As I said, it's fully integrated into our supply chain, and I guess the effectiveness of the system to a large extent depends on our capacity to leverage our business relationships that we have in the supply chain, and that makes a difference. Because when we actually engage a discussion with our suppliers, or when we engage a discussion with the farmer cooperatives, we are in a position to improve the situation on the ground. And I think that as an example of a contribution from the private sector in order to improve this issue of child labor in a specific country, I think that's quite an interesting example. Now, this is what it relates to compliance with international standards, especially the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. But I think there is more that we can do as a business. We can actually be on this compliance approach and really explore ways of positively contributing to the rural development of local communities. I would just mention a few, but one, of course, is directly related to what I was saying. Look at the issue from a supply chain perspective helps, because that basically helps you understand what are the different leverages that you can action to make progress. When it comes to Nestlé, we are of course a big company, but we are talking about 160,000 direct suppliers that we buy either products or services from on a daily basis, and 5 million farmers that we also buy raw materials from on a daily basis, from cocoa to coffee to fresh milk, for example, in Pakistan. I think what the private sector has to contribute as well is in terms of sustainability. In many countries where we operate, and this is the case for Pakistan, this is also the case for Ivory Coast. We've been there for 100 years. So, when we enter a country, we are there to stay, and we really want to contribute to the development of this country, including in rural settings where we actually source our raw materials. this is important to us. This is part of our business model. But what is even more interesting, I think, is the engagement with consumers, which is actually nowhere in these discussions as part of this conference. And this is key because, you know, what we see is that more and more consumers actually want to buy products or services that are actually clean, or actually they know where they come from, and, you know, are either certified or regulated by any type of standard. This is for us a clear trend. You know, it's slow, but I mean it's growing, especially in Europe and the US, but also like in other parts of the world. Like, you know, consumers really want to have clean products. And these efforts on child labor and forced labor are part of that. And I think there is a role to play for the private sector to educate consumers on what kind of like challenges, you know, we face, and what is it that we can do together to tackle them. And finally, this is about innovation and technology. We are, as part of the child labor monitoring and remediation system that I was talking about, we are using smartphones. We have our colleagues from Nespresso, coffee business, that are using, you know, like iPads to gather, you know, the data from the farmers. I think, you know, this is key for us to really like apprehend this issue from a comprehensive manner. I will stop there. Basically, you know, I think my main message is, you know, as private sector, you know, we have a great role to play to actually like improve the situation. But of course, governments needs to come in, you know, when it comes to like scaling up our efforts. I mean, you have the leverages that, you know, we don't have, that can actually make a difference at not only at the regional level but also at the national level. So cooperation, collaboration actually between the private sector and the government is key in this area.
Thank you to Jan. I'd like to turn to Norma now, Norma Flores Lopez, who is from the US Child Labour Coalition. And Norma, I think there is a belief that child labour is something that happens in certain countries and not in the USA, but that's not true, and you yourself were a farm worker right from a young age. So can you tell us a little bit more about your childhood and the hazards you faced?
Hi, everyone. I think that has to be one of the more surprising facts when I speak to people out in the hallways or as we're waiting for the bus and we're discussing about the U.S. in particular. Many folks are surprised to hear that child labor is still a very big issue within the United States. The United States gives millions of dollars to eradicate child labor around the world, but none of this money goes towards eradicating the problem that sits in our own backyard. And so I am an example of one of those children that was out there working in the fields at a very young age. I come from a family of migrant farm workers. My grandparents were from Mexico, and they would travel up through the United States to be able to search for work and follow the harvest and work in the fields of the U.S. Every single year they would travel up, pack up their belongings, take their family, and work in the harvest, and then return back to Mexico. And it was during one of those trips that my parents were born. Both of my parents are U.S. born, but were raised in Mexico with their families and would have to make this trek. Once the border enforcement became a little bit tighter for political reasons, my grandparents weren't able to go into the U.S., but they were able to send my parents to go work because they were U.S. born and they had the documentation to do so. And so both of my parents are pulled out of school. My mother was pulled out of school in the 2nd grade and my father in the 6th grade. And both of them loved to go to school. They loved to be able to learn. But once they learned how to write their name and how to do basic math, they then had the responsibility to go into the U.S. and work for their families. And it's not because my grandparents didn't believe in the future of their children. It was that that's how desperately poor they were, that they had to pull their children out of school and send them to go work because there was no way for my grandparents to be able to make ends meet in Mexico. And so it was a survival. It was done because of survival. So my parents worked in the fields, and I share their story because it was a story then that was passed down to me. I had to deal with the same situation of being born in the U.S., but having to go and work in the fields. And it was because my parents loved school so much and didn't have that opportunity that they didn't want that opportunity to be robbed from me and my 4 sisters. And so while we worked in the fields, as is legal to do so in the U.S. starting at the age of 12, my parents made sure that it didn't interrupt with my school, with my studies as I worked and grew up. But my earliest memories of working in the fields had to have been around the age of 9, when my parents didn't have anybody to watch me or my sisters back at home. And in order to be able to keep us safe, they had us with them in the fields. They felt that that was the best thing that they could do. The alternative was to leave us by ourselves, unsupervised, in migrant camps that we lived in when we would travel from Texas, where our home was, up to Michigan or Indiana or Iowa, wherever the harvest was, wherever there was work available, wherever we heard that we would be treated decently. And so we would go accompany our parents with them to the field so that we wouldn't have to be by ourselves and face many of the hazards of being left unsupervised, or in migrant camps where there's other people that we don't know, other families. In the U.S., many times for migrant farm workers, they live in housing that's provided by the growers, but it's not quality, nice homes. The standards for the homes are really bad. As long as there's running water, as long as there's a roof, and other few requirements, it qualifies for housing. And sometimes what you'll see happen is that many families are put in the same home. So you're living with complete strangers and having to share not only kitchens or bathrooms and showers, but also having to share even bedrooms and other sleeping areas. And so my parents took us to go work with them in the fields, and what started off as play, who could fill up this bucket of apples the fastest, slowly started turning into more and more responsibilities out in the fields to help my parents be able to make ends meet. In the U.S., there's a system that many times migrant farm workers work under, which is the piece rate, in which you are paid based on how much product you're able to pick, how much produce you're able to pick. So there's an encouragement to be able to pick as quickly as possible, as many hands as possible, for the lowest amount of pay, really, that we would get paid out there to work in the fields. For a big potato sack full of onions, we would get paid about 65 cents. And if you think about how much you pay in a grocery store for that, it's really nothing compared to what we're getting paid out in the fields. And so we would be working under my dad's Social Security number. So when you look at how much my dad was producing per hour, it looks like he was making a lot of great money. But in reality, it was my dad, my mother, and my sisters, and me that were all working under that same paycheck, and we weren't making not even the national minimum wage. And so I grew up doing that my whole life. I officially became an employee, and I wore that with a badge of honor at the age of 12 because I felt I'm finally contributing to my family. Our family's desperate poverty was no secret to us. It was very evident every time I went to school, and I had to wear my sister's hand-me-downs and had to depend on the school educational programs by the government to provide me with things like a backpack or a notebook or a pencil. It was very evident that I was poor because I had to spend my summers sunburned from working in the onion fields or in the asparagus fields, while my friends got to tell us stories of vacations and beach trips and other exciting things they got to do during their summers with their families. And so, as I mentioned, at the age of 12, I began working in the fields. And so I was very excited because I thought I can finally make a real contribution to my family, until I hit the fields and realized what was really in store for me. Working full-time out in the fields is not what we consider full-time even for ourselves, and I know that all of us have very long work schedules. For me, working in the fields was 12-hour days, 7 days a week. Sometimes we would go 3-4 weeks without any days off. And at the age of 12, once I started working in the fields, all of that is legal in the U.S. Children are allowed to work as young as 12 years old, as long as it's not during the school day. But after school, we were able to work, which I did. On the weekends, I was able to work, which I did. And anytime we had a school break, any vacation, any week off, again, I was able to work with very few protections, with no required trainings, with no required safety equipment, just being out there, having to work as hard as the adults that were working around me. And so I performed this back-breaking work, whether it was sunshine outside, whether it was hot, whether it was cold, if it was rainy, I was expected to go work out there. And this was especially true when we traveled up north and we weren't in our home. I think that that's another misconception, that farm workers or agricultural workers or many of these workers that are trapped in poverty, that they have a lot of choice. My parents couldn't just decide not to take me out to work in the fields. I was of age to work. The grower was paying for my housing. Therefore, there was an expectation that I would go out there and work as long as was required to work until the fields were completely done picking, whether I felt sick, whether I didn't want to work, whether I didn't like the task that was being assigned to me. Because that's the other thing too about U.S. child labor laws. There's very few restrictions to the type of hazardous work that children are allowed to do. And so I was expected to go out there and be exposed to chemicals that were told to me that were medicina para las plantas. I was told it was medicine for the plants, the pesticides that were covering all of the plants and the crops. I was made to go out there and work with sharp tools with very little education or oversight or training. And it was very difficult, hard work, that I was not out there for choice, or as many times as they like to frame it, for vocational training so that one day I can own a farm. That was far from the truth. I would never have access to anything like that, to one day be an owner of my own farm or to be able to make a living off of this. What I had to go through, what I had to live, was exploitation. And my parents had no real choice, and they didn't know any better, because what we hear now, and what was true with my family too, is if it was so bad, then why would the government allow it to happen? Then why hasn't it been outlawed if it's so terrible for the children? And so that's what I try to be able to bring to people, to realize that there's a big responsibility that we all have, whether it's from the civil society side, whether it's from the government side, whether it's from the corporations, that a lot of these families that are out there are counting on us to do the right thing and to give them the right information and to give them the ability to make the right choices for their families so that they don't have to be trapped into the type of work that my family was trapped in, so that we can be able to restore the dignity of these people that are out there working. If you ask any one of these farm workers, they are proud of the work that they get to do. They are proud of the fact that they get to feed the world, that they are able to see the fruits of their labor. But what we often see too is that they are robbed of their dignity with the type of housing we have to live in, with the type of the way their families are being treated, how their women are sexually harassed and raped in the fields. All of these things that we see in the United States, which is supposed to be the example to the world, which we pride ourselves in being out there asking other countries and supporting them in their efforts to be able to ensure that everybody has basic human rights, but we're turning a blind eye in the U.S. And I think it's very important that we put a big spotlight on this issue and bring more stories like mine to light, to be able to show people that this type of work is not easy. The children are out there not because that's what they want to do. These children have dreams like everybody else. They have dreams to be doctors, to be lawyers, to go to school. We love to read, we love to write, we love to practice the arts. We are people with dreams, with hopes, with families, with personalities, and we really owe to every single one of these children that we're fighting for an opportunity to be able to get access to quality education so that they can be able to have a fighting chance to achieve their dreams, regardless of their background. That's the other issue within the United States too, that we see these farm workers that are treated far less than anybody else, especially if they're undocumented. And a lot of the people that are undocumented look like me. They're not in the U.S. legally, so they're afraid to speak out. They're afraid to be able to ask for more rights, or even for their paychecks that are often robbed of them. And why is it that they're afraid? Because they don't want to be separated from their families. They don't want to be deported. They don't want to, leave the house wondering if this is the last time I'm going to be able to hug my child, if this is the last time I'm going to be able to be a part of this life that I've created in the United States. And so we see a lot of violations from those folks, but even those that are documented, like myself, that was US born, I was afraid of being blacklisted. And a lot of the times growers share these same lists of people of who work for them. And if I was considered a troublemaker, if I was asking too many questions, if I was asking for my basic rights to be respected, then simply next year, there was no work for me or my family. And then what were we going to do? What was my family going to do to eat? Where were we going to live? How were we going to be able to get by? And these are all things that I had to keep in mind every time I wanted to raise my hand, even though I knew that those were my rights that I was entitled to. And I share that because I want you to see that really we can go out there and educate and make all the laws and pledges and promises, but if we're not doing anything about what is happening in the fields, what is happening in practice, then it's not worth even the paper we're writing it on. We really need to be able to take a look at this from every angle and empower the people on the ground, empower these children, their families, and make sure that we're doing everything to give these kids an opportunity to escape the cycle of poverty that so many of them are trapped in. I was given that opportunity, yes, by government interventions. There were educational programs that helped me as my family moved from state to state to be able to get an education. Yes, there were companies that I worked under that didn't violate our rights, that paid us our paycheck, that allowed us to be able to have decent living conditions and breaks, followed the rules. So all of those things helped, along with having my family, stability in my home, food to be able to eat. So it was all of those things that helped my family be able to finally end the circle of poverty that we were trapped in. I was finally able to be given an opportunity to go to the university, to get my master's degree. About 3 years ago, my parents were finally able to retire from working in the fields where they had been since they were very young children. And we're very happy now that my family is able to have one tradition we won't pass down to our kids, which is not having them have to go work in the fields. Thank you.
Thank you, Norma, for sharing your very powerful story there. I'd like to turn now to Junko Sasaki, the Director of Social Policies and Rural Institutions Division at the FAO. Junko, how can we engage actors, people in the world of agriculture in this fight against child labour? And how do you think the contribution of these stakeholders could make a difference in achieving targets, particularly SDG target 8.7?
Thank you very much, Nomina. But indeed, at FAO, our mandate is to achieve the world free from hunger, where the agriculture and food can contribute to promote the living standard of everyone, especially the poorest. The working toward the elimination of poverty, FAO work on reducing child labor. This is the integral part of our program for reducing rural poverty. Looking at the recent report of ILO, it shows very clearly the majority of child labor are happening in agricultural field, 71%. In terms of the number of the children working in agriculture, which goes to 108 million, which is quite a lot. And also not only that, the number has increased 10 million more comparing with 4 years ago. This is really worrisome for us. We know, as Norma has just talked about her life, this household poverty and hunger are driving forces for child labor, especially in agriculture. It is not that parents want them to work in the field. There's no choice for family to feed and family to do the work in the field. They ask children to work. In that kind of situation, what we do, we try to give a choice so that choice alternatives so they can avoid from using other children to work in the field. What we do as FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, we promote good agricultural practice. We increase resilience to economic shock and also natural and man-made disaster to the agriculture, and which brings the dramatic changes in rural livelihood. What are the changes? Of course, we are aiming at reducing the child labor. How we do? Aiming at agricultural practice to reduce the child labor, we bring some kind of technologies. This is one of the examples. For example, community weeding system, weeding machinery that can be used by several households in the community. So no longer children need to do weeding for their farming field. And also we try to have the massive scale irrigation program. Irrigation program, yes, it provides water to the crops, but it's not only that, to livestock, household, everyday chore, cooking. In that way that boys, they no longer need to go to the water point walking for hours with animals to feed, give water to the animals. And also girls, they no longer need to walk hours to the water point to just fetch a bucket of water to do the household work, cooking, cleaning. We can save their time and we can give the alternatives to the farmers who have to ask their children to work. We have a good example. FAO as an international organization, we share this kind of experiences. And also to achieve the changes at massive scale, we make sure that the agricultural policy programs and rural development plans, they integrate the concerns and also the strategies to reduce child labor. Agricultural value chain and support to family farmers need to have the good design to integrate prevention of the child labor and making sure there will be a safe working environment for children. In short, FAO, with a partner, we make sure that agricultural livelihood to be more productive, safe, and resilient to climate changes, so that rural families and agriculture are no longer need to depending on child laborers. That's the way we work together with all our partners and with ILO very closely. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Junko. I'd like to now turn to Andrew Tego, the Deputy Secretary General of the General Agricultural Workers Union of the TUC in Ghana. And Andy, we know that the union has done some pioneering work in Ghana. Do you think organising informal economy workers into trade unions and cooperatives helps to eliminate forced labour and child labour? And also, do you think in the end it can help to end the dependence of small family farms on child labour?
Thanks, Norma. Surely that is the way to go, in simple. That is the way to go. That is the future of our rural economies. That is the way to bring development to the people. I would just want to join my minister in also thanking you for inviting us. He has laid all the protocols. And what I can only add in Ghana is a greeting and a call to action that we call Choboy. So when I say Choboy, it means I'm calling all of you to agree with me that child labor should have ended yesterday. So when I say Choboy, you respond, yay. Choboy, give me a fist. Choboy, you throw it up. And that means that you are agreeing with all of us on the panel that the time to end child labor is now. The time to develop rural communities are now. So I'm going to say Choboy for the last time and give the highest response you can give to it. First, Choboy! Thank you very much for your response. This morning when we were coming here, I was discussing with my Honorable Minister what we can do, and he was saying that we need to formalize the informal economy, empower the rural people to be able to do the things themselves. We have to empower cocoa farmers to be able to do things themselves. And when your minister speaks like this, you have hope as a trade unionist. When those of us in agriculture, coming from the agricultural union and sitting right to FAO, agriculture is the first profession that God gave to man. And when God was giving agriculture to man, he gave it to him in the garden. That is the most beautiful thing that you can ever find those days. When man entered into agriculture, then man began to destroy it. It is man that introduced pesticides. Agriculture was clean, it was green, and it was beautiful. And agriculture can become beautiful again. Agriculture was without child labor, and today we have child labor in it. It was without pesticides, and today agriculture is the third most dangerous occupation you can have on planet Earth. We have to take action, we have to do something, and we want to stop this type of thing. So agriculture becomes a good job again, it becomes a decent work again, and agriculture without child labor is possible. And that is the fight that we have to work on. It is on this premise that I also want to add to the contribution on the table and continue to answer Norma's question, that it is only when we respect the institutions of the rural communities, we empower the rural communities. It is when we look at the already existing traditional systems in the communities, that is the chieftaincy, what the people have, and we strengthen it and empower it and work with them at a matter of rights. That is when we can begin to say that we are bringing change for the people, and the change is by the people. We in GAWU and our partners have worked as a trade union at the formal sector, that is working with collective agreements, working with employers, working with the formal institutions to bring policies in place that ensures that there is no child labor and work is decent. And we are working towards that. Now, the child labor we have that we discussing is in the informal economy, and it is in the rural economy where institutions and structures are not well organized. A system that is so heterogeneous and almost at the blind side of policy. Survival of the fittest. If you are strong, you will survive. And that is where we have the problem, and that is where we have to develop systems, strategies, and sustainable ways of dealing with the issues there. In GAWU and in Ghana, having worked with our partners, our the IUF, the FAO, and other partners that we have worked with, even in civil society, the Global March and the rest, we have begun to develop systems for addressing child labor problems in the rural communities and empowering working people and promoting decent work. What happened in the Ghana example that we have called the Toko model is how we have come together as a tripartite team. You know, beyond the ILO conventions, that is the ratified conventions, are human faces. And whenever the conventions comes into force or we ratify them, we don't only think about our formal institutions, but we must also think that these ratified conventions must be implementable or implemented even in the rural economies too. Because agriculture, it doesn't matter where you find a worker. A worker, whether he's in the formal sector or is in the informal sector, is a worker. And he deserves some amount of service. He deserves decent work, and his children also deserve to be in school. So Norma, my answer is yes. It's yes because we have also been able to pilot programs and pilot models that we think, if well replicated and picked up, can address rural problems and rural solutions. Together with the Stop Child Labour campaign and other partners, we have started or built a model where we have organized as a union. As a union, one of our main tasks is organizing. And whenever you mention social dialogue, you mention tripartite in our systems, people tend to believe that the tripartite system is for negotiating minimum wage alone. And then beyond minimum wage, the tripartite system becomes useless. No, we have taken tripartism beyond minimum wage negotiations and begin to move it in addressing rural and community issues to the extent that rural people are engaged and they are participating in the social dialogue processes. So it is possible to extend tripartism to address child labor issues in communities, and that is what we have done through what we call the Toko model. What we have done in this model is also organizing farmers and fishermen in the rural community, organizing and then promoting decent work and talking to them about how to work safely and letting them make the decisions themselves, that it is their duty and their responsibility to ensure that their own children are in school. And the practice is not to say that agriculture is negative and it is bad. Like I have said, it is the first profession God gave to man. So when we are talking about modernizing communities, empowering communities, we are also encouraging children to be in school, not to be in school and leave agriculture and become doctors, engineers, and lawyers and leave their communities. To be in school and learn how to practice or farm and do cocoa well in the scientific way, how to modernize agriculture and live within the communities. My minister was telling me this morning, himself being a farmer, that, and I love that one, when we modernize agriculture, when we develop the rural institutions, when we empower the farmers, when we bring the things that make people run away to the city, we bring it close to the community. They have their own lighting system, they have their own banking system, they have their own systems that they can use. It is then that they will stop moving to the cities to look for jobs that do not exist, because the jobs are there and they are in the rural communities. And for us in agriculture, agriculture can be developed well in the rural communities to provide the needed job for the people. We have also said that in developing the rural communities, Norma, it is also very good to add a certain level of self-inspection. That is the law that is not making us use child labor in the formal sector, that is through labor inspection. That similar thing should be developed for the communities, such that in the rural area, there can be a form of labor inspection, whether it is the formal government labor inspection or a system that has been developed within the community. In the TOCO model, what we have done is using the community's own systems to be inspecting their activities, to be inspecting the movement of children. So for example, if during school going time, a child is found walking or loitering in the community whilst his friends are in school, it is a matter of concern for the local cooperative. It's a matter of concern for the local chief. It's a matter of concern for the churches, and it's a matter of concern for the community. So what happens in this model is that the father, the guardian, or whoever is using that child is brought to the attention of the chief, who will later on call this group and call in their own traditional system to begin to meet, to look at what the problem really is, why the child is out of school during school going age. And once that single one is addressed, it becomes a deterrent to the rest of the people to know that in a child labor-free zone, where the chief have pronounced that in my community we will not tolerate any form of children absenteeism or children out of school, then the community structures and systems begin to address and keep their own children in school. And whilst doing this, we also introduce what we call the issue of decent work. That when you are working in agriculture, although it is the third most dangerous occupation, like Guy Ryder said yesterday, we have to do things and we have to do it well and we have to do them fast. We need to change the rural system, modernize it such that we take away, agriculture becomes safe again. We take away the dangers of in agriculture. It is when we have taken away the dangers that we, the workers, can do it. Our children can do a certain amount of work on the farm, guided by their parents and not during school going periods, such that they grow on learning. And in this model too, what we have done, is to have a second opportunity for students or children who have grown past their school going period, such that if a child becomes around 13, 14, and is still going to a junior class, we will have a bridge school system. That is having a second chance for the child, for the teachers to monitor his progress until the teachers can place him in the right school, which we call the bridge school system, so that no child is left out, nobody can give an excuse. The school becomes a place that tolerates all children, irrespective of where they come from, irrespective of their ages. So it is on this premise that we say that when you empower the rural people, when you put rural people into systems and into their own organizations, into their own unions, when you make government policies of intervention close to the people and available to them, and make the people, empower them enough to be able to negotiate their own development, negotiate and engage government structures even at the community levels. So people are organized in the communities and they can be able to engage government officials at the community level to demand the services that government policy has planted for them. It is when this type of thing comes that you can see that rural people themselves will take their destiny into their own hands. 20 years ago, we thought that when you are entering a community and you want to address child labor, you provide school materials for the child. You give him school uniform, you give the child school books, you give the child school materials, and forget about the rest. And we have done that over a period. But the next time we come, child labor increases, because when you are sharing school uniform, every child will want to pretend to look like a student to benefit from the school uniform. So the child labor increases. But when we changed this approach, it was one component of it, but we use the rural systems like I have described to address the issue of child labor and promote decent work, that is when you enter the community and notice that the communities has its own monitoring systems in place, such that they do not allow their children to work, not us from outside. And one other key thing is that, Norma, anytime a child enters into employment, one adult is denied the employment. So we realize that if we want to create more jobs, you keep children out of jobs to make room for adults to do the job, because job is for adults. And when these community systems are in place and there is enough surveillance in the community, then they will be able to know who is moving from where. In the Toko area where we have experimented this model, it constitutes, the Water Lake is the biggest man-made lake probably in the whole of the world. And we are working in some other parts of it, and we have created the model so that anywhere you move from and you enter the town does not tolerate child labor. The town has systems in place that will bring you out if you are a child laborer. And then the town has systems and referral systems to deal with it. So what we will need to do now is to scale this up both at the sending level and the receiving level, so that we'll bridge the gap around the lake. So we'll have a fishing activity or catching of tilapia that is child labor free. And this has also been replicated. Last week we were in Ivory Coast. And in Ivory Coast, what we saw through our program, in ICR program, was that now that the communities have begun mobilizing themselves, they are doing their own initiatives through their communal activities to bring their own schools to engage government and pull government to come and visit them and service them. So Norma, what I will conclude with is that it is possible for rural areas to develop. It is possible to keep our people in rural communities. It is possible to empower rural workers. It is possible to promote decent work in agriculture. It is possible to do agriculture and reduce the dangers in agriculture. And this is feasible when we organize rural communities, when we recognize that workers within the informal economy are also workers. They deserve a right pension like we are doing. They deserve the right social protection like we are getting. They deserve the right national health insurance like others are getting. The children deserve birth certificates like children. And the school in the community is made an enjoyable place. And children do not have to walk kilometers before they get access to education. But education is right at their doorstep. It is when we put these systems in place and we work with the tripartite structure at the national level, we move it from salary negotiation to development at the community, then we will be developing models that will make sure that the rural people can develop and the people in urban communities can develop. So those of us who are outside the rural communities are on the other side of the value chain. You can consume chocolate and smile. You can eat products and smile. And you can do things knowing that you are doing it fairly and without the sweat of any child's blood. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Andy. I'm going to turn to Carla in just a second, but just to let you know, it's time is going quite quickly. I understand our panelists have a lot to say, so I'm going to ask my final question to Carla, and then I will start taking questions from the audience so that we can get all your thoughts in as well. So I turn to Carla Caballeros, the Executive Director for the Guatemalan Chamber of Agriculture. And Carla, we know that the vast majority of child labour in agriculture does remain in family farms, and these families depend on their children's labour for the family income. So what do you think can be done to help these families to improve their income so that they can meet their labour needs without having to resort to child labour in the first place?
Voy a cambiar a español para que no nos turmamos y que el tiempo no corra tanto. Tal vez una de las cosas principales, y lo decía quien me antecedió, es que todos lo que queremos es que la gente en el área rural tenga desarrollo y que las comunidades tengan desarrollo. Y en ese sentido, lo que debemos tener en cuenta es que las comunidades rurales y que cada país, cada región tiene realidades distintas y una política no puede ser la misma para un país que pueda ser aplicada para otro. Pero sí hay un tema que creo yo que todos tenemos en común y que es cada vez más evidente, especialmente cuando lo revisamos desde la perspectiva de trabajo infantil, y es la urgente necesidad de transformar las realidades rurales. Y esa urgente necesidad de transformar las realidades rurales corresponde a tener estrategias de desarrollo integral, pero no estrategias que promuevan populismo, no estrategias que promuevan programas sociales, sino estrategias que realmente están enfocadas y que dependen de una estrategia de nivel nacional que está enfocada a la creación de empleos decentes a nivel nacional, incluyendo las áreas rurales. Solamente de esa manera vamos a poder cambiar la caracterización de mucho del empleo rural en este momento. En Guatemala, como en el resto de Latinoamérica y en el resto de países de otras regiones, la característica principal del empleo en las áreas rurales es que corresponde prioritariamente a trabajo agrícola, que depende de agricultura familiar, de unidades de agricultura familiar que tienen poco valor agregado, que dependen de condiciones de infraestructura débiles, de capacidades institucionales del Estado inexistentes, y esa es la realidad que debemos de transformar. Entonces tenemos que poner de primero una política nacional de empleo decente, trabajar de manera conjunta entre el Estado, el sector privado y la contribución que podemos hacer las empresas a través de la inversión y a través de esta creación de esta estrategia. En el caso de Guatemala tenemos un ejemplo, hoy nos acompaña el viceministro de Trabajo precisamente, y este debe ser el enfoque que se lleve hacia el área rural. El trabajo en el área rural es mayoritariamente también estacional, puesto que depende de este tipo de agricultura. Estas estrategias de desarrollo integral deberían de promover precisamente la creación de mayores y mejores ingresos para las personas, pero también la creación de mejores condiciones de calidad de vida y de protección social, y la creación de oportunidades de desarrollo y de diversificación de todo el tipo de actividades económicas que se puedan desarrollar. El sueño para un niño que nace y que crece en el área rural debiese ser el poder vivir como joven y como adulto en un país democrático en el que de manera libre pueda elegir a qué se quiera dedicar, en qué actividad quiere estar involucrado, cómo quiere generar sus ingresos, y eso se lo va a permitir el enfoque prioritario en el que creo que todos vamos coincidiendo, no solamente en este panel sino en los paneles anteriores, y es ese enfoque de mejorar las capacidades, elevar las capacidades y las habilidades de las personas a través de la educación, y particularmente a través de garantizar la capacidad de la educación de los niños. Entonces tenemos que mejorar estos esfuerzos para llevar estas estrategias de desarrollo integral de país que promuevan inversión, que promuevan el empleo decente y que mejoren las capacidades de infraestructura del país.
Thank you, Carla. I'd like to open up Carla's question to the rest of the panel if you have any thoughts, just to continue that conversation, and what more can be done to help families who do depend on child labour. Can I see who else would like, if you'd like to answer that question?
Okay.
Yeah. And can I just please emphasise to keep the answers short, only because we've got limited time and we have more questions to ask.
Thank you very much. I think, in the first place, if we agree that child labor should not be tolerated, then it behoves on everybody to work towards the eradication of child labor. And as government, our duty is to be able to come out with interventions that will address issues of child labor. And as I indicated earlier on, what is it that we are going to do to improve income levels of our children? How are we supporting households, especially parents, making sure that at least they can be able to provide for some of their basic needs? In Ghana, what we are doing is to provide social intervention programs to mitigate the hardship which parents are subjected to. So within the health sector, for instance, we have what we call a national health insurance system, where every child between the age 1 day up to 18 is covered free. So every child up to age 18 is covered free by national health insurance. So if the child is sick and it goes to hospital, nobody will ask the child to pay anything. That is the responsibility of government. It's the responsibility of the national health insurance scheme. We also have what we call livelihood empowerment project, where poor households are identified and government extends some kind of stipends to them over a period of time to also make sure that at least they're able to take care of their livelihood. The biggest responsibility of government, so far as the development of the child is concerned, as I indicated, is that of education, and we believe that that should be the responsibility of government. We are also involving lower government structures. From the national level in Ghana, from the national level, we have what we call regional government, and then from regional government, we have the district government. The district government deals directly with the people at the grassroots, and they have representation from the community up to the district governance level. We believe that if child labor activities should be very successful, then we should be able to involve these actors at the local level so that they will be able to reach out, especially in bringing issues out of child labor to the fore, especially within their electoral areas, and also being an agent where, if indeed issues of child labor are spotted, they report to them and then the necessary actions are also taken. Government is working towards improving income levels of Ghanaians, especially those within the rural areas. Because of that, we have introduced what we call planting for food and jobs, an opportunity to give more farmers high-yielding inputs. We also are extending extension services to them, and then we are giving them fertilizer to improve their products, and we believe these things will help improve their income levels. Beyond even production, we're also looking at processing agric products into semi-finished goods so that at least we'll be able to reduce post-harvest losses. In that case, also giving people work to do and at the same time improving income levels of our people. So these, in a nutshell, are some of the interventions we are doing to make sure that at least income levels are improved at the local level.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the panel that can add to this? If I can come to you, Norma, because some families, their economic survival relies on child labour or forced child labour. So how can we challenge that? Do you want to answer that, Norma? Did you want to come to that? And then I'll come to you, Roger.
I'll just be very brief with my comments, but I think that there is a lot of people that are profiting from child labor, but not a lot of people taking responsibility for the child labor that is happening. And so I think that this is something that both the government and a lot of these companies can do a lot more to be able to address this issue. A big part of it starts with not turning a blind eye anymore to what the issue is. We have a responsibility to know how many children are out there, what type of work that they're working in, what type of hazards that they're facing, and governments, including the United States, doesn't take any of that into account, doesn't count for any of that, and neither does the private sector. A lot of the times we're hearing companies that are saying, well, we don't know that there's child labor. Well, there's a way to find out, and it takes a real effort to be able to address that and to provide opportunities. But I think the biggest thing that we can do is that instead of trying to be able to make, again, all these pledges and promises, is to really address the root causes of child labor. If the families are able to make a fair living wage, if they are paid a decent living wage, paid the wages that they're owed, then we can be able to really start addressing the issue of child labor. All these other sort of programs that we want to be able to deal with are not going to help really eradicate child labor unless we are serious about putting people over profits, and for the government to be able to step in, not to throw that responsibility solely on the private sector and saying, you guys can handle this, you guys just need to do the right thing. But these press releases and promises made by the private sector need to be followed up with real regulations and laws and enforcement, and to actually go out there and do something about this. And then, of course, as we've been mentioning, is these educational opportunities for these children and this development in the rural areas and equal rights for all these children, regardless of their background, regardless of the color of their skin, regardless of who their parents are, the language that they speak. I think if we are serious about ending child labor, we can't keep ignoring these issues just because it doesn't sound as pretty on a press release.
And I will come to Raja in a moment, and because Norma, I've got a question for you from a member of the audience that would like to know what, you know, I suppose what they're asking is, how do you differentiate between child labour and child work, considering that you were working from a very young age and that it seems okay in the US? So how do you differentiate?
Well, it's not okay in the U.S. It's not okay at all. I think it goes back to a big distinction. While I was in the United States working, there's two different sets of way of people that are treated. People that are white are treated very differently than people that are brown like me. And that has been in the history of the United States for a very long time. So the children that do not look like me are treated very differently. They have opportunities to one day own a farm. They are given breaks. They are treated nicely. And I've seen this myself. I experienced this. I, on the other hand, was yelled at, was cursed at, was treated badly, was never given opportunities to work towards learning how to be able to earn a vocation. And so there's a very clear distinction. I was there as an employee to make the company a profit, not as a child to be invested in, to be nurtured. My parents, when they were living in migrant camps, they did not attend church with the grower the same way that the neighbors' kids that are doing chores on the neighbor's farm, they were attending church with them. It's very difficult to treat a child of somebody that you know, of a neighbor that you respect, to treat them badly than when it's somebody that's considered as the other, the way we were. We're brown, we don't look like them, we speak a different language, we eat different food, so therefore we are treated less. And I think that that's another thing that I haven't seen addressed a lot of these panels, is the racism that does exist, how people do get treated differently, and that a lot of these children that are out there working are not white, Anglo-Saxon, blue-eyed, blonde-haired kids. They are kids that look like me, that are poor, that have been poor for generations around the world. And so I think that when you start really looking at those issues, you'll start seeing the distinction between child work that's good for your child, that's going to teach him a career into agriculture, and when it's exploitation of children for profit, and these families are kept in poverty.
Thank you, Norma. Raja, if you wanted to just answer, if you can briefly.
Just a couple of things.
If you can keep it brief, thank you.
We were wondering what are the reasons about it. The first thing which we can really work at is the attitude of the parents. It has to be worked at. Secondly, Norma has very rightly said, the migration of the families from one place to another. They are not able to establish themselves before they are discriminated, and even they have to migrate due to whatever the reasons were. Then there are capacity issues, retention, then the retention of children which are enrolled in the schools. The retention, which it has to be really worked at. Then the coordination and the integration issues. And most of all, in a third world country, developing country, the population has become a burden. You know, when you have more children, you need more resources, you have to cater to their needs, and that has also become a big burden for the countries, or to address the issue of this child labor.
Thank you, Raja. I have a question for you, Jan, from a member of our audience, and this is on the belief of giving people a decent wage. And this person wants to know that cocoa farmers in Ivory Coast live on money which is far below the poverty line. Shouldn't big chocolate manufacturers simply pay decent prices for cocoa that allows farmers not to depend on child labour?
Thanks. I think this question relates to the one before, which is basically like, like how can we avoid child labor, especially in contexts like cocoa plantations. And, what we see from our monitoring and remediation system is that there are basically like different reasons, why children work on plantations. There are actually quite a few practical reasons why they do work on plantations. This is because there is no school, or school is too far, or because they don't have birth certificates that actually prevent them from actually going to school. So we need to work on them. But the other side of the coin is true, it's actually related to rural poverty and basically the income that farmers make. I would like here to draw a difference between, like what we have heard about, which is like mainly related to workers that are actually hired on plantations, and actually cocoa farmers that are actually independent farmers, and they are not actually paid by anybody, so they basically like just sell, their yield to farmers' cooperatives. And I think that comes with an opportunity to actually make these farmers more profitable, based on good agricultural practices, as the FAO is doing, but as we are doing as well, through our agronomists, but also by helping them to access, like markets easily. And we heard from the government of Ghana that a lot of governments, quite a few governments actually, also like set minimum prices, which is like very important actually to make sure that they receive like a minimum price throughout the crop. Certification has a role to play as well. I mean, to make sure that they receive a higher income for good quality cocoa. I think there are a set of like different measures that you can activate to make sure that farmers receive a more decent wage. But the fact of the matter is that like in the entire chain, I mean, there is no value enough, because the end product, chocolate, is not actually expensive enough. Basically, the price that we pay as consumers, for chocolate is not enough for people actually to live like throughout the value chain. So I think there is also like a discussion to have at that level, and this is like our responsibility as consumers to actually like make sure that there is enough value created in the chain, so it can be redistributed, including.
How can you do that?
I guess there are different ways of doing it. You can actually increase the price of your products, and this is what is being done when you have actually labels on your chocolate, like fair trade oats that are actually certified chocolate, that will actually ensure that it comes with decent working conditions, but also like fairer prices. This is one way of doing it. And I guess there are also like tax incentives that can be actually looked at the producing country level. Yeah, that's the two mechanisms that come to mind.
If I can, this question is directed to Bathor and Raja, and again, if you can keep it brief, but if other members of the panels want to contribute to this, please do so. And this is about free education. We've talked before about how education can help bring children out of labour. This person wants to know, is public free education fully guaranteed in Pakistan and Ghana, and until what age? And are there still additional costs that prevent lots of poor families from sending their children to school? So in the end, they do end up in labour. Can you answer those? If I can start with you, Raja.
Yes. In Pakistan, the education is free till the high school. And as far as the labor children are concerned, it's free for the children who qualify to be postgraduates, who go for further studies. It's free all the way through, not just education. Their boarding, lodging, living, everything is free, and it's all paid for. And otherwise, the education is subsidized for normal, if you are not talking about the labor children, you're talking about the general education, it's subsidized. Like for $50,000 you can become a doctor in Pakistan, so it's subsidized. The government pays for it. But the education for the child labor, the laborers' children is free right from the beginning till end. And if the child qualifies, the government takes them all the way through, not just within Pakistan, but outside Pakistan, and pays for their scholarships also.
Perhaps you will appreciate our free education if I explain the Ghana school system. In Ghana, there's a 2-year preschool, which is part of the normal school system, and then you do a 9-year primary basic education, and then a 3-year senior secondary education before you enter the tertiary level. What we have done is that from preschool up to pre-university, which means that you will be in school for almost 15 years, is totally covered by government. Government takes 100% responsibility for everything, and even for those in senior secondary school where the cost is quite huge, government provides free uniform, government provides free books, government provides almost everything that the student will require to enable the person stay in school. And in Ghana, what is even more unique is that you don't have too many of day students. Most of our students, especially those in the secondary schools, are in the boarding house. So their 3 meals that they are supposed to have in the course of a day is also covered by government. So when we say free education, it's totally free. Before the introduction of this free education system, what we had was a limited scholarship system for farmers' children. And invariably what happened was that people within cities were rather accessing the scholarships instead of farmers' children. So what we came out to do was that, no, let's abolish the scholarship system and then make sure that we introduce a free education where every aspect, all that the parents does is perhaps to take care of the lorry fare from home to school, where the child will stay in the school for almost 3 months, come back for holidays, and then go back until perhaps the person completes school. So that's what we're doing.
I would like to add one thing, that the students which we feel are not able to go to colleges or do not come up to par with colleges, we have technical schools, and we send them to technical schools instead, and that is also free.
Okay. Thank you, Roger. And Carla, you want to add to this question as well?
Sí, me gustaría agregar tal vez que el derecho a la educación y no es solamente el derecho a una educación libre. La importancia del derecho a la educación es contar con un derecho a la educación de calidad. Y en ese sentido, las metas de educación dentro de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, que en la iniciativa regional para América Latina y el Caribe libre de trabajo infantil, hemos hecho una alineación y un estudio de cómo están vinculadas con la meta 8.7 para reducción del trabajo infantil. En esa misma línea quisiera compartir en el caso de Guatemala el compromiso de las empresas del sector privado que ha sido manifiesto en la creación de la red empresarial para la prevención del trabajo infantil, los niños y las niñas a la escuela. Esta es una red empresarial que surge de la política laboral, de los códigos de conducta de cada uno de los sectores que forman parte del sector privado, pero particularmente de la política laboral de la Cámara del Agro, en donde uno de los principios laborales es la prohibición de trabajo infantil y está traducido de manera que los niños y las niñas tienen que ir a la escuela. Existe un compromiso de las 12 entidades gremiales que en Guatemala forman parte de nuestra asociación, que son todas las entidades productoras de café, en el caso de Anacafé, de la Asociación de Exportadores de Café, los productores de azúcar a través de Asasua, los productores de banano, los productores de palma africana a través de Grepalma, los productores de hule, los exportadores de productos tradicionales a través de la Asociación Guatemalteca de Exportadores y otras asociaciones en el país que forman esta alianza dentro de Cámara del Agro, que se comprometen con este principio 5, pero que decidimos ir un paso más allá y dentro del plan de implementación de la política laboral, uno de los 3 ejes principales, además del cumplimiento, es la generación de condiciones sociales para la prevención de trabajo infantil. El por qué se elige como generación de condiciones sociales es precisamente partiendo de 2 realidades. La primera, que el trabajo infantil está concentrado dentro del sector informal, pero hay un compromiso del sector privado de asumir esta responsabilidad y este reto. El segundo es que no puede ser a través de un enfoque punitivo, sino que debe ser a través de un enfoque preventivo que se aborde lo que sucede en las áreas rurales, y es a través también no de sustituir la función del Estado, sino de acompañar la función del Estado. Hicimos una alianza estratégica con una ONG formada por empresarios en Guatemala, que se llama Empresarios por la Educación, y es miembro a nivel latinoamericano de la red Reduca, en donde el objetivo principal es dar seguimiento al sistema educativo del país para garantizar que 3 metas se cumplan. La primera meta es que se cumplan los 180 días de clase de manera efectiva. La segunda meta es que se cuenten con maestros que son competentes, que son docentes, que pueden enseñar a los niños. Y hay una serie de programas que incluye premiación, incentivos, la mejora curricular, la profesionalización de los maestros. Guatemala era el único país que no tenía maestros graduados en la universidad sino a nivel secundario. Hoy lo tenemos, es enfrentado aún por algunos grupos dentro del país, pero es uno de los avances en garantizar que se tengan maestros que pueden enseñar a los niños con educación de calidad. Y la tercera y la meta más importante es contar con niños en ese sistema de escuelas para que sean niños que efectivamente aprenden. Y esos son niños que aprenden y que tienen las capacidades y las competencias necesarias en las áreas de lenguaje y matemática. Lo que hace Empresarios por la Educación no es sustituir con escuelas, es simplemente monitorear que estas 3 metas se alcancen y fiscalizar y trabajar de manera conjunta con el Estado para alcanzar las mejoras en el sistema educativo. Pero adicionalmente también dentro de las asociaciones del sector, muchas de ellas tienen programas de educación que están llegando hacia las comunidades rurales.
Thank you. I have about 5 minutes left, so we have to keep the answers really brief, if that's okay. This is a question that a member of the audience has asked for all the panelists, so whoever would like to answer that, please do put your hand up and talk. This question is, are we sufficiently involving international finance institutions in this discussion about child labour? So this is the World Bank, the IMF, African Development Bank. Do you think they see child labour elimination as a priority that should be integrated into their policies and strategies? Would anyone like to try and have a go at that question? Roger?
It's a difficult question, you know, one has to be careful how you go about it, but I personally feel that more could be done. There is less coordination. I was just discussing with my colleague that in the last 2 days of our conferences and meetings, not even once I heard, which I mentioned in my speech also, not even once malnutrition was mentioned with child labor, which is a very important thing. It has to go hand in hand. And thirdly, I strongly believe that IMF, World Bank, and all the other international organizations could do more with ILO and all the other organizations who are working for the child labor. They could do more, they could fund more, and they could be more involved in this, and I'm sure we're going to get better results.
Would anyone else like to add? Carla, if you can, or Andy, did you want to speak?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think that at the global level, there is a need to have policies that focuses on communities, so that whatever policy is being developed at the World Bank, wherever it's being developed, it must have a community focus, and it must also take into consideration that whoever the partner is that is working on it, there must be an issue of social issues that should include child labor and also promoting decent work at different levels, so that you cannot have a financial arrangement that promotes the usage of children. You cannot have a financial arrangement anywhere that does not promote decent work. All this process should be part of the arrangement that multinational institutions, the international financial institutions, and even at the global level, there should be strict negotiation processes within the global unions and global framework agreements to cover some of this things, so that whatever happens at this level have direct implications for what happens in the rural communities. And they are not in isolation. So multinational, you mentioned, you talked earlier about some issues in terms of the cocoa prices. Let me just give a minute. I think that at whatever level we negotiate incomes and prices for farmers, there must be a certain level of transparency. There must be a certain level of negotiations at all the levels, so that a cocoa farmer knows what processes we go through to arrive at the cocoa farmer price. Actually, sit down now, when you ask a cocoa farmer, how do you get the world market price for cocoa? There are things there, and I think there is a need to improve negotiations and transparency within the whole chain here.
Thank you, Andy. And you have for about 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. I agree that the multinational companies do have a responsibility in making sure that they integrate issues of child labor in their programs, because they have a lot of weight when it comes to getting nationals to come out with programs that will address national needs. So for instance, if a country like Ghana will want to go to IMF for facility, perhaps it should be a precondition from IMF that yes, we are going to give you this facility, but as a condition, you also make sure that you reduce incidence of child labor within your country. I want to believe that if they begin to assert themselves, then countries will begin to sit up and be responsible. So I would want to recommend that IMF and World Bank play a front role on issues of child labor.
Thank you. And that's about a minute to go. Well done. Thank you to everyone for your questions. We have run out of time, but please do come up to us and speak to the panelists if you have any more questions that you would like to ask. But I'd like you to give a round of applause to our panelists, Carla Caballeros, Andy Tego, Junko Sasaki, Norma Flores Lopez, Jan Vis, Raja Ashfaq Sawar, and the Honourable Ignatius Bafor Awua. Thank you very much.